Hello, everybody. It's Christi Karate, and it's time for Christi's Clarity. And guess what I'm going to do today? I am going to share with you about my love story, my true love story, the moment, the time, the way that I met my beloved, who most of you know is Jerry. And we in June will be having our 33rd wedding anniversary. So it is really a divine appointment, right? So the reason that I'm telling this story is partly because it's Valentine's Day, but also because I think you can glean a lot of things from what what happened for us and how we navigated this for your own direction, whether it's a personal relationship, whether it's a professional relationship. I think that sorry, I had to do something with my computer. Um, there. Uh, I think that you can glean things for your own benefit from this story. So I'm not telling this story for my own gratification, although I do love telling this story, but it's for Christie's Clarity tips today because there's a lot to learn from this. So I was in graduate school and for fine art in a very top-notch school, Claremont Graduate School, uh, and I was single, and I was financially kind of um, beginning to open up to my financial goodness, to creating my life of my dreams, beginning to learn these principles that I now teach. And I had come from Huntington Beach, now they're called Centers for Spiritual Living, where Dr. Peggy Bassett had been my teacher and mentor. And that's another wonderful story, which I believe is on my website under my signature story. And the short of it is, I came into that place at that time of my life as a true victim. I didn't know how to let go of blame. I didn't know how to um, uh, accept my good, and I didn't know how to, control my thinking. To really decide what to have that power over my own thinking. It thought me instead of me thinking it. And so it was a real eye-opening time. It was a very painful time because I had so many challenges coming up, but they were great opportunities for me to heal. So I studied under Peggy Bassett, and as a result of that, my dream of going to graduate school came true. So I moved to Claremont to go to graduate school. Now, when I moved there, I had no job, I had no savings, I had no family support. I was going to a private college that charged $30,000 per semester for me to go to school there. And I went on absolute faith that I had begun believing. Now, it's not blind faith, it's belief on the 12 principles that I began to learn and integrate into my everyday learning that I talk about in my book, Beyond the Box. And so as I'm moving there, still kind of up and down with the victim and blame, and then moving into my empowerment and what uh, what should happen. And I always say I left no stone unturned. I applied for every grant and scholarship. I looked for a job there in Claremont. I found, an inexpensive place to live. I was just doing everything possible. And I did indeed get accepted into the graduate school based on my portfolio of my artwork at the time. Um, so I go off to school, still dragging along a lot of my luggage from my past, still being a victim, still being blaming. And first thing that happened was I got, uh, we'll call it let go of the place I was living. I wasn't in agreement with some of their behaviors and treatments of each other in the home that I had rented a room, and I actually moved into uh, not on the up and up, but covertly moved into my art studio that was provided for me there, um, at the graduate school. So if the fire alarm went off in the middle of the night, I had to get up. So I slept in my clothes and look like I'm working when the fire department comes through, things like that. You know, I was doing anything I could to navigate this program. And I tell my tithing story often, where I was awarded a major grant by the college, by the university there, and then also many different things, you know, happened for me to continue to navigate my program and be able to complete that, which I did within the 2 years. But in the meantime, I wanted to find my beloved, and so I started acting as if. I started imagining, if I was sitting in my studio doing my work, what would it be like to have my beloved sitting there with me, you know, watching me do my artwork, you know, doing whatever he did. And I remember one day I walked down the empty hallway covered with plaster, because I worked a lot in sculpture and plaster and so forth, just a mess, right? And I remember thinking to myself, good thing you can't see me now. And I heard clear as day, I heard, you're always beautiful to me. Yes, you're always beautiful to me. And I just went, oh my gosh. And so I held that vibrational frequency of, this is the person that is my beloved. And then some really tragic personal things kind of happened. And I felt like I was putting the last straw in the camel's back towards my success, towards the my personal well-being and everything. And so I had been engaged over at Dr. Peggy's church. I'd been engaged with an organization called the Peak Experience, and they were basically, you know, kind of processing, you know, healing, processing kind of things. And I never quite could afford the actual deep dive intensive, which was 2 weekends. It was a total of 5 days on 2 weekends. And when I was at this rock bottom of my personal life, and a lot of things going on for me, I just called them and I said, I'll do anything. I don't have the money. They scholarshiped me, had me do some service work for them, and I went to this training. And in that training, it was very intense. You know, it's kind of in the old days of, you know, processing it out and so forth. And I was really intense one time, and I happened to be sitting next to this guy. And when he saw me kind of freaking out, he put his arm around me and he leaned in my ear and he said, it's okay. You'll be okay. And I just went, oh my gosh, I recognize that voice. But I'll tell you, he was not my type. At the time in graduate school, I had spiky hair, I had thick black eyeliner, I drove a scooter, I wore black leather, black boots, you know, and I was, you know, not your normal um, uh, your normal person, right? And he looked like he was the biggest granola boy I'd ever seen. And actually, at the end of this retreat, or of this workshop, at the very end, we were told to go find a partner, and to not to make sure it wasn't somebody we were uh, romantically interested in. And I wasn't romantically interested in him, but he was sitting right next to me, and I actually V-lined it for this other person. And I just said, well, if there was anybody in this room, it might be him, mostly because of his voice and like the gentle, caring voice that made me feel so cared for, right? So I uh, went on my happy way, and I I got really sick, and I wrote these letters to people to try and, you know, clear everything up. And I wrote him a letter that saying, well, I thought maybe there was something romantically in between us, but I see that isn't true. And so he wrote me back a letter saying, how dare you? So we decided to meet and to go up. He had to go up into the mountains to work with his uh, students that were counselors. And he dressed like a granola boy, Birkenstocks. He actually wore bell bottoms at that time that he'd gotten in Italy, right? And he just looked like a granola boy. He was not what on the outside I viewed as my kind of person, right? I always went for the bad boys, and always got hurt and burned and things like that. I just couldn't hold in goodness for myself. So we go up here, and I watch him do his thing, and I just go, he is just not my guy. And um, so I uh, was thinking about kind of what had brought me to this point in time, and it had been my mentor and teacher, Dr. Peggy Bassett. And I remembered sitting in the front row of a class I was taking with her, and I had a list of 80 qualities that I was looking for in a relationship. The number one, top one, was does not smoke. Well, guess what I was doing in graduate school? Not a lot, but I'd go out with my art friends, and smoking was a thing, and I'd smoke and things like that. The second one was he danced, and then there was a few others. So I'm sitting in the front row with Dr. Bassett. This was before I'd gone to graduate school and even met Jerry. I was sitting in the front row, and she she didn't know I had this list in front of me. And she says, and if you want something in your life, like a relationship, you need to become that. Okay, here's Christi's clarity, right? Here's Christi's clue tip for today. You need to become that. And I went, wait a minute, I'm smoking. Do you know, in that instant, I have never smoked a cigarette ever again. I stopped in that moment. And then dancing, that came along later. But the rest of the things, I just went through the list, and I went, I must be this to attract this. Okay, so back to graduate school. So back to the peak experience. So the group was getting together, and oh no, well, we'll just go to that. So the group was getting together. We had gone up and done this thing. I still didn't know if he was my type or not, but we had shared a nice picnic up in the woods, and we shared about a lot of our commonalities and things like that. And I went home just thinking, this is a nice person to know. Well, something stirred within me, and I was living that person that I wanted to attract in. I was living as that person that I wanted to attract into my life. And so we went to this common event that we were having at the peak experience, and we hadn't seen each other as a group. I'd seen Jerry in the meantime, but we hadn't seen each other in a group for weeks. Maybe it was even 2 months after. And it was a sailing, we were going sailing on one of the guys' boats, right? And I get there, and Jerry's sitting there, and I got the biggest smile on my face, and he got the biggest smile on his face, and we were together the rest of the trip of the boat ride. And when we got off the boat, that was it. We were together. Now, I can't tell you that we didn't have our ups and downs after that. There's some good stories around that too. But when we stayed focused at the truth, and our relationship is built on a foundation of our spiritual truths And together we share that. We meditate in the morning together. We make all of our decisions, not all, but, we make our common decisions together. We, we have traveled the same path together for 33, well, that would have been 35 years now, because we had met each other 2 years before we got married. So, my number one tip of this, oh, actually, I want to tell you one more quick thing. While those 2 months in between, I started imagining that I was walking the path with my beloved. This is an important piece too. But there was this big mound of our stuff that we had to get out of the way before we could even look over the mountain and see each other. And when we went up to the mountain, I felt like I could begin to see over and he could see me, but we still had work to do until we could clearly walk on that same path without that division between us. And so that's tip number 2, is we had to do our own personal work to be the vibrational match to attract each other and to come together. And we have traveled the world together. We have, lived in amazing places together. We have an amazing son together and now an amazing daughter-in-law. And this was, as we always said, this was a relationship that was made, that was a peak experience, right? Because we met at the peak experience. So I hope this finds great value for you. And remember, the first thing we must do is we must become the vision of our dreams. We cannot get to our dreams. We must come from our dreams. That's a quote from my mentor, Mary Morrissey. Look forward to seeing you next Friday, everybody. And thanks for being here.